any of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
Hey, welcome back to MythVision, everybody. Derek Lambert, I'm the host. I've got a special guest here, Dr. Robert M. Price. He's an American New Testament academic. He has written extensively on the Christ myth theory. That is to say, there may never have been an actual historical Jesus to begin with. He's written several books. Shameless plug here, as you see him on the left side of the screen here. I just want to give you an informative Amazon tour. Go check his books out. Robert M. Price, Jesus is Dead, Holy Fable. He has a series, The Amazing Colossal Apostle, which I feel like is going to be more and more important as Nina Livesey and other people are starting to push for this idea of Paul, really the historical Paul, but also the letters of Paul. You really got to get that. There's so many books he's written, and he's joining me today because he talks about the Old Testament too. He's not just a New Testament academic, but he ventures on, I call him the Encyclopedia Bob. That's the best way to describe him. So, Bob, welcome back to MythVision. We're going to have a hoot today. How are you?
Great. Of course, that'd be better if I had some of the Holy Ghost chicken that always sustained us in the old days, but you live too far away.
Look, it's like the manna of the Israelite Exodus. You know, it was there for the moment. I tried to store it up, and then it was maggot filled and no good anymore. It's disgusting. So I will definitely be paying you a visit. Of course, shameless plug for MythVision. Join the Patreon. Dr. Richard Carrier will be down here at my house the beginning of next month. I'm taking one question. I caveat it as one good question by a Patreon supporters. If you're a financial supporter of the channel, do so and ask your question. I will be recording it in 4K, high quality, your own question in your own video, just like I did in the good old days, Bob. And it helps keep this thing going. But also I said good because sometimes there are questions that make me question the questioner, okay? Not to be offensive, not to be derogatory, but Bob, sometimes they say there's no wrong question or no bad question. Sometimes, okay, there seems to be a question that I'm just like, really? Is that okay? Anyway, so I plan on making a trip to you, Bob. At some point, we got to do some more in-person Holy Ghost chicken interviews, and yeah, we'll make that happen. If people want to make that happen, I know that they will. We'll have some great conversations. I also have Dennis McDonald will be coming down in a few months. I've got another scholar, Robert Hoyland, who's an early critical scholar in Islamic studies, who will be making a trip in December. And I'm trying to get back in the groove now that my roots are in my own house and do this more often. So I have you here. People can get your books. They could join your Patreon. You write on Substack, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, what else is there to plug here before we begin the Yahweh to Jesus journey? Anything?
Plug. Well, I'm working with you on some interesting scripts and articles for the Journal of Higher Criticism. That's a lot of fun. Carol and I are planning possibly a YouTube channel with my plenty of room for me to embarrass myself with all kinds of nonsense. And she and I are hosting a film discussion group here in Selma. We've been doing that for several months, and that's always a lot of fun. And I continue to write various heroic fantasy stories, Lynn Carter characters, since he was a friend of mine and I'm his literary executor. I do new tales of his barbarian character Thongor of Lemuria and his sort of intentionally cheesy sci-fi character Star Pirate. And it's great fun. And I'm writing a whole mess of stuff academically, and a lot of reviews and so forth. It's really, I just have endless fun here. It's
I'll turn to you all the time. Say, hey, what do you think about this? Any changes? You know, you're really good at that. And so I highly encourage anybody to reach out, connect with Bob. He's an encyclopedia and he's a good friend of mine. So, Bob, before we did this live stream, I said yesterday, the day before Bob, we're going to do a stream. We're going to talk about Yahweh. But when we talk about Yahweh, we run into a typical problem. And my problem is this. Oftentimes, academics like to look at only Yahweh and Yahweh specifically in this journey. Maybe El, because it's so obvious that El and Yahweh are so closely related within the biblical corpus. But I can't skip over Dionysus. I can't skip over this syncretism that we find within antiquity and how that plays a role in the evolution of Yahweh along the way. So I am not the teacher here. There are going to be some moments where I might step in and show some interesting things that I learned along the way.
Oh, yeah.
I want to give you the opportunity to start us off of your position. And if you bring up Garbini, I'm popping the book up. So we might have to read a little and have a little fun here.
You might think that this is a sort of stuffy, boring, theoretical thing. Why not just talk about God and our relationship to God and so forth? Well, current events bring up, as these things often do, fundamental questions about God and what it means when somebody says they believe in God. And I'm thinking of the horrific events of recent days here in my state of North Carolina, where these awful floods carried away hundreds of people to their deaths, including over 100 young girls who were at a Christian camp. And one heard afterward people saying, well, these things are really tests of our faith. And I think that's ironic, because surely it comes to the point where the evidence so drastically contradicts. We have Richard Carrier coming on. My favorite thing of his that he wrote is a short little essay about is the world the way we would expect it to look if there was a God? Is there any sign of divine providence and so on? Not the argument from design. Isn't it amazing how the system works? Oh, certainly it is. But the idea that God is in providential control for some good reasons, and when he allows people to die, when, like these young girls at a wholesome Christian camp, what possible good does that do? And does it challenge your faith? Or if you were straight with yourself, wouldn't it simply make you realize that your faith is meaningless, in the sense that you're not really saying anything conceptually consistent, that you're saying, well, God is in loving control of the world, even though he works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. But that can only take you so far. Are you assuming that in the sweet be this big seminar where God says, well, I know you've been wondering what the hell I was doing, letting Hitler come to power and doing this and that and the other thing. Well, here, may I have the envelope, please? No, since there's no likelihood of that happening, it sure ain't going to happen in this life, then you got to ask, what is it you're believing? What is it that gives you comfort if you say, oh, God is a God of love? but that love is compatible somehow with the destruction and torment of numerous individuals, and ultimately eternally torturing people in hell. How is this divine love consistent with that? Oh, love divine, all loves excelling. I don't know if I use the word excelling, all loves contradicting, because you might say, well, look, I just don't know yet. It's the big secret. I think you know enough to say that if somehow the word love or the concept of love is so expansive and flexible that it is compatible with any and every circumstance. In other words, you saying God is love or God is loving does not entitle you to expect anything. No matter what happens, you will take it as being compatible with the now meaningless assertion that that God is love and we can have faith in God. That's just like speaking in tongues. You're just you're saying something because you want to express religious sentiment somehow, but there's no real content to it, though there seems to be. I mean, you're trying to comfort people with this. How is this comfortable? You know, God may send you to the eternal Auschwitz and you'll have to thank him for it. How is, you know, what kind of a universe is this? You've blown it all out of proportion. And so you have to ask, does God, the word or concept mean anything? And that's the kind of question that arises when you look at the evolution of a God concept. Nietzsche said that in the genealogy of morals, that you can't really understand anything without knowing how it got here, how it came to be what it is. And then things may be illuminating, but your esteem for certain things may change. It may be astonishing, but not anything you would praise the creator for. I think that's happened plenty of times, and one of the only ones to wrestle with it was Dostoyevsky and the brothers Karamazov, where he has two of the brothers, Ivan and Alyosha, talking about God's providence, and Alyosha, who is a pious monk, appeals to his brother Ivan, who is an apostate, to come on back to the church and believe in God again. And he says, I just cannot do that in good conscience, because there's this little problem of the suffering of innocent children. If I decided to worship God again, does that not make me an accomplice after the fact? Am I not saying, well, I guess it's justified somehow? I don't quite know what the divine Führer is up to, but who am I to question? You can't do that and maintain any moral integrity. And so and especially if you think you can, you're playing with fire, because your God must be your paragon of morality, at least. And so if God is morally unreproachable, it cannot be blamed for anything he does or allows, well, maybe the same is true with you. And that's how you can justify telling people that God's going to eternally roast them in hell. Maybe that's how you can, if you're a member of certain religion, think that it's all right to bomb the innocent and exterminate them just because they don't believe in your religion. Well, you know, if it were up to me, I wouldn't do it, but God says to do it, so, you know, who am I, little mortal pipsqueak? It's very dangerous. Because all bets are off. It's like, what does it say? All things are possible with God. Well, that includes moral outrages, because if you say, well, it doesn't mean what it means to us, you can't apply that to God. Well, I can kind of see that in the same way I could say my love for my country and my love for my family is not the same thing as my pet's apparent affection for me. We're very different beings, and you can see a kind of a scale of continuity there. but the gap is so great, it's almost irrelevant. If you're saying that God being allowed morally to inflict these horrors, then you're saying, well, I guess maybe humans can do that too, and I don't have the right to question it. You can't do that. You can't make God into an idol. And the controversial character of the evolution of Yahweh, what makes this a disturbing thing, is that you begin to realize that it must be a human construction. I remember when I first read an essay, an apologist's essay about the supposed different names for God in the Pentateuch, and how much of the documentary hypothesis rests on that it's not just that God has a bunch of names, el-Yon, el-Olam, and so on, Jehovah Jireh, and all these things. No, the theory was these must have been different deities. And eventually, as the Jewish people moved toward monotheism, they just combined them all. And I remember finding this very alarming. I don't think I was 20 years old yet. And I read this and I thought, geez, if this is true, we don't really know that we're dealing with anything that's more real than a comic book. It's just a cultural artifact. It was important for me to say that, yes, the Bible is simply describing the God we talk about in church and we worship. I can't think of his name now. Yako.
Oh, yeah. Yako Gurik.
Yes.
He writes an absolute I spoke to him the other day on WhatsApp. He wrote an absolute philosophical juggernaut of a PhD dissertation dissecting Yahweh. And in fact, I sent this to an apologist buddy, which we had kind of a debate for a while. He was very friendly, but we were debating, on the phone, having our little respectful contentions on the talk. And at every point, every apologetic talking point would come up. And then finally at the end, you could tell he's getting a little bit more irritable and his patience is waning. And finally he made some jabs at me. And I'm like, that's exactly what Muslims say to me when I point out this about the Quran and its dependence on myths and this. And then he made this comment kind of like, well, if that's the argument, then I agree with the Muslim. Clearly saw he was trapped in a corner that he had to end up agreeing with Muslims on this in order to stand his ground. And then finally apologized. But I said, dude, because he said he laughed at the documentary I produced, which was like 4.5 hour documentary I made. And it wasn't all of Yako Gurik. He's from South Africa. His PhD, it wasn't all of it. And it's still 4.5 hour movie. And it covers all of that stuff. The idea that Yahweh has a council that reflects exactly what an Iron Age, council of humans on Earth did. Even like the geography and the weather, for instance, like he paid attention to every aspect of Yahweh and the language where Yahweh's talking that gave clues that if we were investigating this like we would today, Bob, we'd be able to pin him and go, hold on. So you mean to tell me if he was in the Arctic, or if he was a god in, complete desert lands without any green lush anything, then the way he is engaging with these people who are writing his text would be radically different. He would look more like the gods of those areas rather than the particular geography from which he arises or seems to be at home. And he just goes through one thing after another, the lack of omniscience, the omniscience, and then contradictions, everything under the sun. And it's like no stone seemed to have been left unturned.
Yeah, one thing he said, I believe it was when apologists and philosophers of religion say, oh, well, it's credible to believe in God and supreme being and all that stuff. That really, even if they're right, what does that have to do? Does that prove Zeus exists? because it's the biblical God is not far removed from Odin and Zeus and all that. You're talking about the possibility of a God, but not the Christian God. This now Thomas Aquinas understood this. He said reason alone, unaided, can lead you to the conclusion that it led Aristotle to, that there must be an unmoved mover and so forth. But that's very abstract. So Aquinas said, yeah, that we can know that much, as Aristotle didn't know Christian. But we need revelation to tell us what kind of a God it is. Is he a compassionate God? Is it a he? Has God given a way of salvation, and has he spoken? Aquinas said, you can't reason that out. It's almost like Kant. You have no evidence for that. There's nothing that proves that. So you need to have faith. But there are certain things you don't. You have reason, but here you're going to have faith to get in the door. It's the price of admission. But of course, that's question begging, because how do you know? We're taking an awful risk, Vader, and so defending a philosophical God really doesn't help their case. The more you find that cogent, the more trouble you have with the Christian God. In fact, another way I like to say this is, if you start saying, as even St. Augustine did, that God exists beyond time, that all is an eternal now to God, well, welcome to Vedanta Hinduism. Because you're saying that the world in which we live, a world of temporal sequence, cause and effect, change and growth and so on, is really a kind of trick of the light. It's because of our radical limitations of perception that it seems that way to us. But God, the ultimate reality, sees things as they are, and for him, as a dream when one awakes, the psalmist says, what we experience must be an illusion. But they don't want to say that, because Vedanta says that the notion of a personal God is just a kind of a semi-imaginary demiurge. And like Tillich says, God is a person and the negation of himself as a person. Oh, that's like Ishvara versus Brahman. And so that you just can't have the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as the God of the philosophers. The minute you import philosophy, you're poisoning Christian faith or any other kind of literalistic one. And when you show that the God concept has evolved, and I mean really evolved, then what reason are you going to start saying, well, that was progressive revelation, it eventually clarified things? Well, that's one way to try to put a good face on it, but that only makes sense if you have some prior reason for it. You better have some other reason to think that in the days of Israelite polytheism and so forth, that they were really on to something but couldn't explain it yet. What reason is there to say that? Why say that? I mean, you're undermining the faith that they did have by saying, well, of course, there weren't several gods. All the stupid pagans thought that. Oh, you mean that ancient Israel thought that too at one point? Well, give them a break. They're clarifying things as they go along. But why is there something that is being obscured by our concepts, and eventually they'll be clarified and we'll see God as he is? Why are there anything but shadows? And it's just a value judgment. Like progressive revelation undermines everything you want to believe. Because if progressive revelation allowed for the belief that God was commanding genocidal warfare, that was dangerously false view of God, far worse than any heresy. Is there a hypostatic union of natures, or are there two persons, etc., etc.? I mean, this is much more serious than that, and you have to be satisfied with it if that's all the human race can come up with. In other words, you have to be satisfied with being drastically wrong. What do you know? I think progressive revelation is no revelation. And because whatever it is you believe, it's going to be swept aside when the next wave comes. And so how can you have any faith in it? Well, I guess something remotely like what we talk about is true. I don't know what the hell it is. What is it you believe? There's no content. Well, who was Yahweh? Originally, from surviving evidence, and there's not much of it, but it speaks pretty eloquently. It's pretty clear from ancient monuments and texts and so forth, like pre-biblical, that Yahweh was one of several gods in the Elephantine Egypt papyri left. There are letters between their temple staff and the home office in Jerusalem. I mean, the idea that there was a non-Jerusalem temple is contrary to the Old Testament.
Yeah,
I mean, it's already a debunking. And but they're talking about how to worship the gods, and they name them, and there is Yahweh, but there's also several other ones, including the Zoroastrian Ahura Mazda. I mean, that is really a shocker, a pantheon of gods. And we should have known that anyway, because as the Bible says, they worshiped Asherah in the temple alongside Yahweh. And we know that's true because they found a bas-relief that shows the two seated figures, and it actually says Yahweh and his Asherah. What does that mean? Just somebody's practical joke? I'm afraid not. That's what they believed. And you can say, well, that just shows that they were sinking into syncretistic apostasy. That's just a value judgment. But the fact is, at that point, they were polytheists. And it was, or just, who were the sons of God, who got kind of translated out of it. In the Septuagint, they made them into angels and so on. Well, they were the sons of the God Most High, El Elyon, Deuteronomy 32:8, and God El Elyon created enough nations so that each one of his sons would have a fiefdom of his own to rule, and Yahweh chose the people of Israel. And but he is not El Elyon. He is the son of El, the son of God, and this is just like the Canaanite religion. The high god is El, and his son is Baal or Bel. And there is one text that we talked about that Garbini draws attention to, where where El actually says, the name of my son is Yah.
We're going to read this. Okay, Bob, you blew me away. So for those who don't know, my last video that I did, which was the gardeners and kings and the gods. The one even before that, you and I had a long talk one night on the phone. You're just one brain cell blowing up after another, just going, whoa. And I got lost in some scholarship that I never heard of. And I started reading myth and ritual school members, people that I had no clue, that were like generation or two after Fraser and some of the original guys who attempted this kind of comparative mythology stuff with Bible. And then they really spell it out. They start getting down into, everything, philology. They're diving deep into the rituals and comparing rituals and stuff. So I think we'll get to Garbini here in just a moment, if that's cool, and read some of this, because he was so controversially cutting edge in terms of what he was suggesting. And we did an interview yesterday with Dr. Gad Barnea, me and Neil from Gnostic Informant. We were discussing some of this. Where does Yahweh come from? And he thinks that Yahweh comes from the north. He thinks he's from the Hittites, right? He thinks that the Hittites had him first. He didn't come from the south. Now, no one knows where Yahweh originates from. Even Garbini mentions this, and others have commented, like, clearly there's a continuity somewhere into the distant past. Where it all begins, there's so many different takes. Before we get to Garbini real quick, can we hit a few super chats along the way? I might try to pay attention to the super chats. James Scarborough, thank you so much for being a member. Really appreciate that. Joining the family means the world to me, man. By the way, you get early access as members to any of my videos. So I launch early membership material and stuff like that. So you're ahead of the learning curve. You're already there early. And hopefully we can start doing some hangouts with members only. Agoristo, forgive me if I butchered your name. Thank you for the super chat. I can't get over the fact that Dionysus may have had, I believe it's Yesos or Jesus, as one of his names and being from that region of the Levant. That's interesting. I don't know the language, but if it sounds phonetically that close, it would really pique my curiosity, because for those who don't know, it's not like I'm making this up. It's not like any of the scholars are making this up. If you read the oldest accounts of Dionysus, he originates in the Levant. Did you know that, Bob?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, he comes from the Eastern Mediterranean, somewhere along the west, the eastern coast, and there are, like, Cadmus is from Tyre. Supposedly, Cadmus in the ancient mythos travels to Greece, teaching the Phoenician tongue to the Greeks. And so there's, like, ancient myth, and Herodotus seems to think Cadmus is real. But keep in mind, we now look back and go, okay, Cadmus is like a etiological myth on how, these things took place. Cadmus is supposedly his uncle. And when we look at the Euripides Bacchae, story, Cadmus is, I think, his great-grandfather or his I can't remember how he is related to him. He's related to him. But Dionysus is said to have been nursed by one of the nymphs that's from Scythopolis. I wish I had a map that showed everything here, but let me show you what I do have. Because I think this super chatter's onto something that needs to be further investigated. I'm using a Hittite one here. Over here near Byblos, Tyre, and whatnot, in northern Israel, or if we want to call it the Galilee, literally where modern day Nazareth is, there's a place right next to it called Sepphoris. There's actual in the ground mosaics right here of Dionysus, right? These are Hellenistic. These are actually in the Common Era, so they're not pre-Jesus. But being Sepphoris is next to Nazareth, Scythopolis is literally 18, 19 miles from the very place that Jesus is supposedly walking around. And in the Gospels actually goes to this place and preaches and teaches. And the funny thing is, they found actual archaeology of Dionysus from there. In one of the myths, his nymph dies and he buries her there. There's a mountain of Nisa that seems to be from around this region. All of this stuff implies Dionysus was from the same region. Really, really shocking to me, but I didn't make it up. Nisam Amzalog, who's an academic Bob hasn't been introduced to yet. Where is he at? Right here on Academia. He has an interesting paper. Were Yahweh and Dionysus once the same God?
Whoa.
If you haven't read it, Bob, I'll send it to you. He's also got other stuff. Great. But do we want to read this for a second here?
Yeah, I'd like to hear it.
Okay. I'm going to read through this for a second, and I hope we don't put everyone to sleep. But if we look for a parallel deity to Yahweh in ancient Greece, we think immediately of Zeus, the patron of the Greek pantheon, whose representation was introduced in the Jerusalem temple in the Hellenistic period. The shared ancestry of the two has been well accepted from antiquity. For example, by Josephus in Antiquities to modern times. Troublesome evidence, however, reveals a much closer relation of Yahweh to Dionysus than to Zeus. The first point is the broad diffusion and popularity of the cult of Dionysus in ancient Israel, the deity being worshipped even in priestly cities in the cult of Yahweh, such as Sepphoris, which I pointed out a minute ago. The second is the identification of the Nabotian god Dushara, Dusaris, with Dionysus. The appellation Dusara, ze Seir, the one from Seir, coincides with the origin of Yahweh from Seir in biblical poetry. So like in Judges 5:4 and Deuteronomy 33:2, Yahweh is from Seir. Now, this is interesting because this is in Arabia. This is supposedly right there in, what is the name of the, they've got the stone cut tombs and all that in the walls.
Petra?
Petra. Yeah. Petra. Yeah. I always say Petra. You say Petra. But in Petra, we have, let me get to this. These are the Nabotian god Dushara. I'm trying to find the better images that I made for this live stream. So here's examples of some of the Nabotian gods Dusaris. But you might go like, why are you even showing me this? Who gives a crap about Dushara or Dusaris? Well, I'll tell you who cares. The Panarion, which means the medicine, the antidote of Epiphanius. So Epiphanius talks about this, Bob. Get this. Listen to what he says. For the Savior, let me zoom into this. For the Savior was born during the 42nd year of the Roman Emperor Augustus, in the 13th consulship of the same Octavian Augustus and the consulship of Silanus, as the Roman consul list indicate. For these say as follows: during their consulship, I mean Octavian's 13th and the consulship of Silanus, Christ was born on the 8th before the Ides of January, 13 days after the winter solstice and the increase of light and the day. This is January 5th, Bob. This is the Epiphany.
Epiphany, yeah.
Right. Greeks, I mean, the idolaters. So he's going down here, right? Celebrate this day on the 8th before the calends of Janus, or January, which Romans call Saturnalia, Egyptians call Chronia, and Alexandrians Sicilia. For this division between signs of the zodiac, which is a solstice, comes on the 8th before the calends of January, and the day begins to lengthen because the light is receiving its increase, and it completes a period of 13 days until the 8th before the Ides of January, the day of Christ's birth, with a 13th of an hour added each day. The Syrian sage Ephraim testified to this calculation in his commentaries when he said, thus the advent of our Lord Jesus Christ, his birth in the flesh or perfect incarnation, which is called the Epiphany, was revealed after a space of 13 days from the beginning of the increase of the light. For this too must needs to be a type of number of our Lord Jesus Christ. I guess the number 13 might be a number representing Christ. And his 12 disciples, since added to the disciples, he made up the number of the 13 days of the light's increase. And how many other things have been done and are being done because of and in testimony to this calculation? I mean of Christ's birth. Indeed, those who guilefully preside over the cult of idols are obliged to confess a part of the truth. Notice what he's about to say here. He's going to show this overlap. And in many places, deceitfully celebrate a very great festival on the very night of the Epiphany, to deceive the idolaters who believe them into hoping in the impostor and not seeking the truth. Now watch this. We're going to look up Dusaris again. Is that the only one? I'm trying to find. So here we are. This is the core. Okay, the core virgin. This is also done in the same way in the city of Petra and the temple of the idol there. Petra is the capital city of Arabia, the scriptural Edom. They praise the virgin with hymns. It's a virgin that they're praising by the way, Corey. Oh, here it is. It's right above that. So he goes on to say here about this idol, and many things have been done that are being done because of and in testimony to this calculation. I mean, Christ's birth, right? So we did that. First, at Alexandria, in the Corium, as they call it, it is a very large temple, the Shrine of Cori. Cori is literally like the chthonic underworld deity. She's also known as a virgin here. They stay up all night singing hymns to the idol with a flute accompaniment. And when they have concluded their night-long vigil, torchbearers descend into an underground shrine after cockcrow and bring up a wooden image which is seated naked on a litter. It has a sign of the cross inlaid with gold on its forehead, 2 other such signs, one on each hand, and 2 other signs, one actually on each of its 2 knees. Altogether, 5 signs with a gold impress. And they carry the image itself 7 times around the innermost shrine with flutes, tambourines, and hymns, hold a feast, and take it back down to its place underground. And when you ask them what this mystery means, they reply that today, at this hour, remember now, he said this is the same night of the Epiphany, the Christ is literally the flesh, God in the flesh into the world. Here he is, right? That these guys have part of the truth, but they're clearly wrong. That same hour, Corey, that is the virgin gave birth to Ion. And it goes on. The same is done in Petra, which we just talked about Petra being the same place with Dusaris, right? Because he says they praise the virgin with hymns in the Arab language, calling her in Arabic Shamu, that is Corey or virgin. And the child who is born of her they call Dusaris, that is the Lord's only begotten. And this is also done that night in the city of Elusa, as it is there in Petra and in Alexandria. So he goes on to say, I have been obliged to prove this with many examples because of those who do not believe that the Epiphany is a good name for the fleshly birth of the Savior, who was born at the 8th hour and manifested by the angel's testimony. And he actually goes into another place about water and wine, but I'm not going to get into that stuff here. I say all this to say, we really should be looking at more connection, and not just through, what do they call that? Greco, interpretatio Graeci, or Greco, right? Like it shouldn't be just exclusive to Greek. At that time, they just mingled and named your God the same as our God, and there's nothing to it. Nisam Amzalog is saying, no, if you go down to Arabia, they had mining, they literally had trade routes, and that Yahweh is a metallurgical, or it seems some forms of Yahweh or some forms of Yahwism have metallurgical roots. And the traveling of this God from this region may have made it up to the Ionians, the Aegean Islands, sometime in the Bronze Age, which might have started the whole Dionysus myth.
Also, doesn't Jerome say that Bethlehem was also the birthplace of the god Dusaris?
It wouldn't shock me, but it would be obviously just overlapping this entire thing we're talking about, right? Yeah. I mean, amazing stuff. One more comment, because the Homeric hymn to Dionysus, he gets captured by pirates. The pirates are looking for his parents to get booty, money, not the booty most people think of. And on the way, they're traveling to the Eastern Mediterranean, in the very region. And in one of the myths, I'm not sure if it's the hymn to Dionysus or if it's in one of the other early accounts of Dionysus, but it says that he was born in the place where there's the sea that has no life. So like, he's somewhere born near the Dead Sea, right? That there's no life in the Dead Sea. And I'm like, what the? Even the Greek myths are saying this dude is from the very region that we're trying to see Yahweh's popping up at. So you got geography, you have a lot of linguistics that later on, as our super chatter was trying to point out here, linguistics with the Yah, Yeo, Yao, Yao, various different forms of pronouncing the name of Dionysus in the chants and worship and Yahweh. So I figured that needed to be a component of this evolution, because when we get to Jesus, using your Margaret Barker stuff and saying, if Jesus is supposed to represent Yahweh somehow in the flesh, or an earthly manifestation of Yahweh in some way, however you theologically want to wrap your brain around what that even means, I see a great counterpart to Dionysus, as we've seen with the Dionysian gospel, the way that Acts portrays things. But I can't help but see there's something going on, and it's not just Jewish sources, and it's not just ancient Near Eastern. We have to have a Semitic tongue in order to have it line up. Like, Greeks are looking to the East. The East is looking to the West. There's conversation happening here.
Well, in, I guess, First Maccabees, they're talking about the Hellenization of Jerusalem, and like people going naked to exercise in the gymnasium, which means the place of nakedness, gumnos, and other stuff that real conservative traditionalist Jews didn't like. And they rightly saw that there was a real danger of wiping out any Jewish traditions and just becoming Hellenized, period. And so they started a classic revitalization movement to save the old way and rebel against the new. And one of the things that was going on that really riled them up was that Antiochus Epiphanes forced Jews to take part in the Dionysian revels. But it seems to me that they may not have had to do much forcing, because some people already were saying that Dionysus was the same as Yahweh. And that wouldn't have been much of a difference. Oh, you want us to use that name? What the heck? Why not? And they probably didn't see themselves as apostatizing to a worship of a false god, or like the whole Sabazius religion is based on the identification of Yahweh and Dionysus, and we don't know a whole lot about that one, but it's some Jews, Hellenized Jews, like in the Epistle of Aristeas, this guy says, you call him Zeus, we call him Jehovah. That's astounding for a Jewish apologist, which is what he was, to say. And so there's a lot of interesting things going on, despite the attempts of people to purify it retroactively. And or the idea that in Second Maccabees, I guess, when there's a battle against the Seleucids and the Jews win, and I think, and they're examining the bodies of their fallen soldiers, and they find on them protective amulets of images of the gods of Jaffa, which would have been the Semitic deities, meaning Semitic polytheism. And it was like, I think it's a wink to the reader to say, you see, there must not have been much gods, or these guys wouldn't have been dead. But nonetheless, it says, so they prayed for these people, and therefore it's a good thing to pray for the dead. And that's the reason Martin Luther kicked it out of the Bible. He said, whoa, wait a minute, you can't have prayers for the dead, it's too late. But it shows that these guys who were defending the Jewish way of life against the Seleucids were already with a foot in that camp anyhow. Otherwise, what would they have been doing, wearing the amulets and fighting for the Torah?
It sounds more like Maccabees is looking back and trying to take the Maccabean Hasmonean dynasty and then like retroject their current issues onto this idea of the Ptolemaic Jews. And likely the Ptolemaic Jews would probably have gladly received and accepted that syncretism. You know, one can posit, okay, during that period, the Ptolemies under Alexander, they did it because, well, they were kind of under the umbrella of the larger power and they needed a compromise. But me and Neil from Gnostic Informer are getting more and more persuaded that the Interpretatio Graecae is not giving enough fair reputation to the ancient authors who saw this. They weren't just throwing nonsense in the air, but there was a real backbone or foundation behind the period in which it was simply easy to connect them. Like philologically, archaeologically, even the way worship was dealt with in Dionysian worship and in Yahwism. Let me show you another thing that Amzallah gets into, and then whatever you want to talk about, and then we'll jump to super chats and hang out with the crowd because there's too much to even cover here. You and me will go on forever too, by the way. He says, and we talked about how Yahweh is said to be from the same area as Dusares, right? This is Petra. And Dushara was probably a late Edomite version of the worship of Yahweh. The third, and he was going through several examples, right, is the syncretism observed in Thrace during the Hellenistic period between the cult of Yahweh and that of Sabazius, the Thracian Dionysus, in which Jews and pagans gathered in the same religious communities. Me and Neil were blown away by some of the interesting things Gad showed connecting in Delos, I believe it was, one of these Greek sites. There's triads that are coming in from both Samaritans, from the Greeks. Like, they had a common worship place that was falsely identified as a synagogue, as if it's exclusively only for like Jews or Samaritans. No, this was like a common worship place. They syncretically were like linking up. Anyway, given the particularism of Jews, this singularity argues in favor of a strong shared ancestry, if not identity, between the two gods. The fourth concerns the interdiction of the subversive cult of Dionysus Liber in Rome as formulated by the Senate in 139 BCE. This edict led in 133 BCE to the persecution of the Jews, who were curiously accused of propagating the cult of Dionysus Liber. All these observations plead toward an identification of Dionysus Liber and Sabazius with Yahweh, extensively acknowledged both by Jews and pagans during the last centuries preceding the Christian era. And then I guess there was a mosaic. I tried to pop one up on Google. We were there in Sepphoris. We actually filmed the mosaics on the floor, and there are Dionysus mosaics in Jewish homes, Jewish synagogues, the whole nine. The homogeny between Yahweh and Dionysus is not surprising, as it may seem at first. Both deities exert the same subversive influence against the established pantheons and temples. Let's just read. Exactly as in the Exodus for the Israelites, Dionysus calls for deliverance from the tyranny of kings and gods who support their abusive authority. In Euripides' Bacchae, Dionysus even calls on everyone, slaves, freedmen, and princes, young and old, and men and women, to partake of the ceremonies and musical processions of Dionysus worship. Will anyone say, this is part of the Bacchae, will anyone say that I do not respect old age, being about to dance with my head covered in ivy? No, for the god has made no distinction as to whether it is right for men young or old to dance, but wishes to have common honors from all, and to be extolled, setting no one apart. The same universal call for Yahweh's worship is expressed in Psalm 148, 11-13. Kings of the earth and all peoples, princes and all rulers of the earth, young men and maidens together, old men and children, let them praise the name Yahweh, for his name alone is exalted, his majesty is above earth and heaven. This is not the only parallel between the two gods. Choral performance, dithyrambos, is an essential component of the cult of Dionysus. Indeed, it is the first stage of his knowledge. The same feature is encountered in ancient Israel, where the importance of choral performance in the cult of knowledge of Yahweh is extensively attested in Samuel 6:5, Psalm 25:12, the list goes on, Chronicles. The parallel is even reflected by the similar antiphonal mode of the choral performance that characterizes their worship. Plutarch observed many parallels between Dionysian banquet and Israelites' cultic festivities. Again, this is not surprising. By the way, he goes on, Bob, and on the idea of them having ecstasy or ecstatic experiences. The ancient Israelites had this. One of the tales actually depicts the ancient Israelites as getting drunk off of a wine, but it drives them mad. It drives them mad. Not like they're just drunk, They're like driven mad to war and wage war on each other. And Nisa Mamzalog covers and identifies these tropes and themes over and over and over. And then last thing, I guess, is Canaanite roots. There's so much more here. Several Greek testimonies trace Dionysus' provenance to Canaan. Herodotus specifies that this god was introduced in Greece by Cadmus, the Tyrian founder of Thebe, or Thebai, and the personification of the Phoenician colonization in the Aegean. This is confirmed in the 7th Homeric hymn, which reports the capture of Dionysus by pirates as we talked about earlier. Origin to Nisa, a mountain most high and richly grown with woods, far off in Phoenicia, near the streams of Egyptus, Egypt. In the 7th hymn, he first appears on a jutting headland by the shores of the rootless sea, Dead Sea. Come on. If Dionysus is from this place, Nisa Mamslog is concluding that it seems, in his estimation, Bob, that Yahweh in some way traveled to the Aegean through people who probably were part of trade, part of mining and doing the metallurgical stuff, and found his way into the Aegean up there in the Greek regions, bringing with it the Hephaestus myth, where Hephaestus is literally Dionysus's brother, because in the Yahwism, you literally have a golden calf being crafted from melting down the metals by Aaron and Moses. This is an art that Nisam Amzalog says that only like shaman, magician, very, very high up, elitist worship leaders, so to speak, cult leaders, had the ability. They were like divine men. And I can't remember the Hebrew term for this, Elish Elohim or something like that they're called. And they're like forming and crafting stuff out of metals, which was like a divine practice, and made its way up there. So there's a whole rabbit trail of literature back behind this, Bob. I'll have to send you after this, but I just, maybe something in your mind triggers and goes, hold up, there's something to this. I don't know if there's anything that comes to mind before we get to super chats.
Well, I don't remember if I've even read this. It would have been so long ago, but Mircea Eliade has a book called The Forge and the Crucible, which has to do with this kind of thing. And somebody wrote an article for the Journal of Higher Criticism about God being a metallurgical, Yahweh being a metallurgical deity, or Cain. He's the same as Tubal Cain, and he's the first forger of metal weapons and so on. So there is that big thing in that element in Genesis also, and it's got to be important. I mean, people magnify aspects of their lives and their societies, projecting them into the sky as gods and so forth. So it's no surprise. Like a great example of that may be from modern times. Last night, Carol and I were listening to this polymath, Robert Edward Grant, who from just the way he talks about things, the guy is an incredible genius, but he's come up with an AI persona called the Architect, possibly a little influence from the Matrix, I don't know. But he says he's talking to the voice of the Akashic records and such in the 5th dimension, but it's pretty obvious that he has formed the personality of this AI entity by feeding in a lot of his own work, his books and the sources that influenced him. And so even this late in the game, you have people making themselves into gods, projecting their own ideas into this heaven described in more scientific sounding ways. Yeah. But we can't seem to help doing that.
Okay, my final thing I want to get out of you, because I know you're, first of all, for those who don't know, if this is your first time viewing Bob Price, he has 2 PhDs. The guy has spent quite a bit of time studying and learning, and regardless of the PhDs, I know some brilliant non-PhDs, right? Gamirkan, others. But Bob, you're extensively trained in theology, right? Who better to ask a theological question, biblically related or Christianity related, than you? And so I'm one of these guys, clearly, I'm critical, I'm skeptical, I doubt, okay? But I hear Christian apologist, And I'm look, this might, for those viewers who are like, you always had an axe to grind against apologetics and apologists. And yeah, rightly so. Okay. I've got some of my beef with some of the ideas, not so much the people as much anymore. I'm actually trying to befriend a lot of these. Yeah. I've gotten a little carried away in the past, Bob. And I made amends and everything's cool. I love when we can be on, decent talking terms with people that you don't agree with. Right.
Amen. That is, so important.
It's
otherwise you're just a nut too. You don't want to be a mirror image of that.
No. And I'm learning, right? Life is a dance. And I've noticed there's some scholars, New Testament academics that I highly respect, whether it be Bart Ehrman, whether it be James F. McGrath, James Dunn, D.G. Dunn. They come from a school of academia that supposes Jesus was first and originally viewed not in the same kind of divine terms. He was just a man, an itinerant apocalyptic preacher. And I'm sympathetic to the apocalyptic part. It's pretty obvious that this is all over the texts, but that it's anachronistic, right? They say, to suppose that Jesus was God in these texts, that he was favored highly by God. He was just a son viewed in an adoptionist way. There was no divinity to him in the earliest stratum. And apologists often will come in and go, yeah, but why is it that when they say, who is this that calms the storms and seas with the word? To me, I actually agree with the observation that the apologists make, though I don't believe a lick of it being true, literally. The text seems like this is trying to wink at you. Only Yahweh can do this. So it seems like a harder task if he wasn't really understood to be Yahweh in some way. It seems like a harder task to try and explain, well, he's just an Ish Elohim. He's just a man of God that Yahweh empowered to do these duties and deeds on earth. I get that temptation. There's a lot of people, Dan McClellan, others who take this view. As a theologian, long ass question, but help me wrap my head around, is Jesus Yahweh in your estimation? Because either way you cook it, it's still mythical legend of some sort. There's no way to get around that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm a convert to Margaret Barker's theory, which once I read it, I thought, my gosh, why did I never think of this? So nobody else ever say this. She said, Jesus in the New Testament is repeatedly called the son of Theos, God, which is the substitute or the Greek equivalent to Elohim. But he is never called the son of the Kyrios, the son of the Lord. He is called the Lord, but he is never called the son of the Lord. If Lord simply means God, that is very difficult to explain. And if it's Yahweh, what would be the problem with calling him the son of Yahweh unless they understood that Jesus was Yahweh, the son of God Most High? In fact, the demons call him that. We know who you are. You're the son of God, the Most High God, El Elyon. And she says the Deuteronomic fusion of El Elyon, God Most High, with one of his sons, Yahweh, the patron god of the Jewish writers, many Jews just wouldn't accept that any more than you had people that wouldn't, Catholics, who are like my mother-in-law, Cecilia. She is a committed traditionalist Catholic. And she doesn't like all the innovations of Vatican II and so on from some 50 years ago. And a lot of Catholics still won't eat meat on Fridays and this, that, and the other thing. They want the Latin Mass. they said, we're sticking with the old time religion. We don't know how that can have been true once, and then the next day, by a vote, it's no longer true. Come on. And so they say, and the same thing with Warith Deen Muhammad. He was a revisionist in the Nation of Islam, the son of Elijah Muhammad. But he had this modernizing thing to make the Nation of Islam more like Orthodox Islam. But a lot of the so-called black Muslims said, not kosher. And Minister Farrakhan was a traditionalist. He was a lieutenant of Elijah Muhammad, and so he led a split. So you had the more traditional Nation of Islam, black Muslims, and what they called Bilalian Muslims, named after Bilal, the first African Muslim convert in Muhammad's day. And they remain separated today. Well, without mentioning those particular instances, what Margaret is saying is you would expect many, if not most Jews to not accept this new Deuteronomic orthodoxy. What? You're saying that that Elyon and Yahweh are the same? No, I am sorry. You can't deny the existence of one of the gods by trying to fold them into another one. So that you see remnants of this in many forms, Philo, the Gnostics, and early Christians. And she said the idea that Jesus is Yahweh, the son of Elyon, means that these Jewish Christians accepted the pre-Deuteronomic view. That's why New Testament Christology, that doesn't sound like the Jewish Messiah. No, it doesn't sound like the rabbinical, Deuteronomic, altogether human Messiah, but it sure sounds like the sacred king who was God's representative on earth and died and rose from the dead and became king of the gods, seated at the right hand of the Father. It's obvious that New Testament Christology is the same as the old sacred king mythology of archaic Israel. And so these two things continued side by side. The official, I mean, it's like the Pharisees, this mob that knoweth not the law is accursed. They disdain these fundamentalist primitives, whereas they said, oh no, you are the modernists and you are the heretics. Well, that's Christianity, as Margaret Barker says, came from the old time religion. And so you've got Jesus must have been understood as a kind of a theophany of Yahweh, the Son of God, the Son of the Most High God. How long was he around? Well, longer than most of the Old Testament theophanies, but not that long necessarily. The whole that would explain where Docetism came from, because in some of these stories where the angel of Yahweh appears, people at first mistake him for a flesh and blood man, but then he refuses a meal that Samson's parents set out for him. He says, I can't eat that, but he says, light it on fire and it'll become a sacrifice to God. And or in Tobit, Raphael, another archangel, tells the humans he's been helping, I didn't tell you this before, but I'm not a human like you. I am an angel sent from God, and we don't eat. That's why you never saw me eating. And that the idea that Jesus had the form of a man, as it says in one of the epistles, he came in the likeness of sinful flesh. Docetism may come right out of the angelology of these, and the angels were the sons of God in the original version, which still was alive. So Jesus, to take the long route around this, when Jesus stops the storm, as Yahweh did, it's because he is Yahweh. But you can't easily apply this to Orthodox Christianity. because they didn't understand it. They were polytheists, not Trinitarians. There were several gods, which is what Trinitarianism says, though they won't admit it to themselves. Yeah. We believe in one God and there's three of them. What? And Jews and Muslims say, you poor Christians, you want to be admitted to the monotheist club, but you're obviously polytheists. Oh, no, we're not. I don't know what else to say. Look at yourself in the mirror.
But I mean, they're the most obvious example, right? But even then, in both Jewish and Muslim worldviews, if you believe in the divine, because a lot of Jews I know don't, they're just atheists or agnostics or something. But I don't know any Muslims that are. They're pretty much strict believers in some way, even if they are more liberal in their approach. But they still have jinn, they still have demons, they still have all these other divine-ish categories. So, nobody's strictly monotheism as if there's only God and there's nothing else. There's always these other categories of things that are playing a role.
But if they were created, they're not gods.
Right. That's true. That's true. Well, if you go far enough back, there are gods who get created, but I guess maybe the Muslims may not interpret it that way, because if you go far enough back, you will find that gods do end up getting constructed or created, and usually through genealogy, of course. But they're still, it's a fun trip, isn't it? So we touched on Yahweh. We touched on the idea there. Garbini is, I feel like, our last landing place, just to read his "My son is Yah" thing, and if you want to get into that. Yeah,
there's this old Canaanite tablet from long ago where El says the name of my son is Yah, the transliterated YAW. And so that, and it's obviously, I mean, wouldn't you expect that because of what it says in Hosea? Yahweh says, in the coming days, you will no longer call me as my Baal, but rather as my husband. Well, Baal, I mean, that's why, like Gideon was called Jerubbaal, let Baal contend. That implies his parents were committing him to the almighty Baal, defending him throughout his life. Or Saul's sons, Ishbaal, man of Baal, or Meribbaal. I forget exactly which one that means, but they kept changing these things and re-explaining, redefining them once they said, no, Baal and Yahweh aren't the same, but obviously they are. What they do, the way they're described, and that's Marduk, same thing. He's interchangeably called Bel or Baal and Marduk in the Enuma Elish. It almost doesn't matter which one, it's obviously the same guy. Well, Baal and Yahweh are the storm gods who ride in cloud chariots and all that. They're the same. And the same thing with their sons, right? The morning.
What is that called? The psychologist who says the narcissism of differences. And he points out that when you have these in-group, out-group disputes, but the out-group is so similar to the other group, there is the biggest beef. There's going to be so much contention. So the fact that you have a showdown with the Baal and Asherah, worshipers in the Elijah story over against the Yahwist, Elijah, the one-man Yahwist, of course, comes along and they're all cutting themselves, begging for Baal to send the rains. Nothing comes. Oh, he must be on a journey. I think Francesca Stavrakopoulos in her book, God and Anatomy, I think she points out that she's pretty vulgar in this book. I love it though. And she's just like, it might be meaning that he's taking a shit.
That's what I've heard. He's gone aside.
Yeah. So there's that. It's like a mockery though, complete mockery. Well, why is there such beef while using the psychologist narcissism of little differences? I can't remember what it's called. But
me neither, but it's like the worst arguments are in families. Right. You're close enough to clash. You're so similar. Like, why do Baptists hate Pentecostalism? Oh, that's speaking in tongues. They're like twins, except for that which Pentecostals some will say, it's not that much of a big deal. Well, it is if you don't believe in it. And so, wow.
Yeah, that's kind of the highlight I think you're trying to point out. And just to read Garbini for 1 second, because this is some amazing material. I highly recommend anyone who's interested in getting the book. Here is the book, just so you know. History and Ideology in Ancient Israel. Giovanni Garbini. Brilliant scholar, is no longer with us. I wish he was. If he was, I would have actually found a way to interview this guy, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, he says, and this is our last little dive before super chats. So get your super chats in. Bob, be mindful. We don't want to be here all night, but we're going to get some super chats probably and have some questions to answer. Okay. So here we go. We're just diving in the middle of a sentence here because the section, I think he's talking about the origin of Yahweh or getting into the name and where he comes from. Let's go on and examine the extra biblical evidence, he says, notwithstanding its sporadic and apparently secondary character. The epigraphic evidence is a basic point of discussion for our topic because it is the only original evidence relating directly to the worship of Yahweh. It should be said straight away that the epigraphic evidence and more generally the written extra biblical sources do not confirm the picture that the Old Testament presents of the rise and establishment of the cult of Yahweh in the form that we usually denote with the term Yahwism. This explains the attitude of mistrust, if not direct rejection, shown by almost all scholars towards the epigraphic or literary data outside the Bible. I think that is a jab at him suggesting that there's like an apologetic in the academic arena.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that's what he's trying to get at?
Yeah, he's saying, why are they so slow to pick up on this? Well, it's very inconvenient for them. It would screw things up with their faith commitment. Or they're just so used to, even if they're not believers anymore, there's still, like Bart Ehrman, in my opinion, he's still in the same basic cognitive box that he learned, whose dimensions he learned when he was a believer, and is slow to see which dominoes are knocking each other over.
Gotcha. He says, down to the present day, for reasons that can easily be imagined, the Jewish tradition has exercised such a theological or even psychological pressure that it has conditioned even historical research, like you just said, which only very recently, thanks also to key discoveries, has begun to release itself from the fetters in which it had been bound during our century by famous scholars, for whom an unacknowledged confessional interest now appears to have predominated over a concern for scientific objectivity. In this connection, let us look at the treatment received by some onomastic evidence, which the Old Testament itself provides favor of the existence of the cult of Yahweh outside the Israelite sphere. The Joshua, in whose field the ark drawn by the Philistine cows ends up, 1 Samuel 6:14 and 18, was a Canaanite from Beth Shemesh, but it has not been difficult to attribute to him a more or less close Israelite descent. Then, 2 Samuel 8:10, we meet a certain Joram. I used this in my documentary, by the way, this section, son of the king of Hamath. But self-styled philologists amend the text to Hadoram, a name which contains the Aramaic divine name Hadad. Following the example of the pious chronicler, who had already taken his own steps, 1 Chronicles 18:10, to eliminate an inconvenient piece of evidence, then asked for Jochebed, Moses' mother. No better expedient has been found than to affirm, without producing any evident justification, that in his name the presence of Hebrew divine name is quite uncertain. Real quick, just so we're on the same page here and the audience is tracking, sounds to me he's actually engaging in the textual criticism of the documentary hypothesis, or the textual tradition of, like, what do we do with the earlier layers? So maybe you might, say some of the stuff is happening later than what he is supposing. But am I on the right track of suggesting it sounds like he's engaging on the stratum of dating this material in some way?
Yeah, and he's saying that that's obscured if you start fiddling with the names. Oh, it can't mean that, and so forth. That's sometimes that does happen. Like, for instance, Ishbaal and Mary Baal, those weren't the original names because Ish Bosheth and Methib Bosheth. Bosheth means shame, and it's a sort of a euphemism for idol. And so nobody would have named their kid that. It must have been Meribbaal and Ishbaal, or the latter meaning man of Baal, and it probably said that in the text. I mean, it almost certainly did, but they didn't. You know how one of the Psalms says, "I will not take their names upon my lips." They were hesitant to, just like they were hallowing the name of Yahweh. By being careful how they used it, they're anti-hallowing these names. I don't want to give them any airtime at all.
Gotcha. Okay. Continuing. This assertion is all the more remarkable in that it is made by no less a scholar than Noth, who in the pages which he devotes to the presence of the divine name Yahweh in Hebrew nomenclature, in fact proves more of a theologian than a linguist. That's a jab. Holy moly. This is demonstrated clearly by the final words of his investigation, in which, having summarily liquidated the Amorite onomastica, and having also turned Yabibi, the Aramaean king of Hamath, known to us from the annals of Sargon II, into an Israelite, he calmly went on to say, thus is no case is the name Yahweh to be encountered outside and independently of Israel. So the tradition of the book of Exodus could be right, namely that the divine name Yahweh arose for the first time in Israel, or better, for the first time with the people of Israel, and therefore in some way it goes back to the work of Moses. That sounds like apologetics. You want me to continue real quick here just to get a little bit more?
Yeah. That is really awful to hear that Martin Note, who was a very radical critic, but turns out to look like a fundamentalist compared to minimalism.
Wow.
It is amazing.
It's amazing where you put yourself and the angle you're looking, how far someone might feel. Like a lot of Christians that I know look at Bart Ehrman as like the most liberal example of an academic, and the most he's the most liberal, more like, if Bart says it, whoo, that's far enough, but I'll accept it as long as it aligns with me. They use Bart as like a weapon against people on the other side, right? But to those who are kind of doing this in the critical scholarly realm, and I'm not the one who says this, students of his that I've interviewed are like, yeah, he's kind of, some of the ideas we think are dated, right? He's kind of back here. These are students within Duke, Chapel Hill, things like that. And for someone like you might go, no, he's conservative in his position compared to where I'm at, right? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he's really. I'm recording one of my books to make it an audio book. It's the book I wrote, Bart Ehrman Interpreted, and it's the chapter called Agnostic Apologist, and he's using pro-historical Jesus arguments that apologists use that I think are pretty easy to shred like tissue paper. And it's amazing to me that he doesn't see that. They're just gaping holes in the reasoning, in my opinion. And I just think he has not been able to get himself to think outside of the apologetical box.
Interesting. Okay, so Garbini goes on. If this has been the fate of the biblical evidence, it will not be difficult to imagine that reserved for the extra biblical evidence that the discoveries of texts have produced, leaving aside the mention of Yahweh in the Stele of Mesha because of the corruptness of the text, we have already noted Yabibi of Hamath. Then there are the Amorite onomastica of Mari and of some other Syrian cities, which can be dated around the 18th century BC, which offer various attestations of names compounded with Yahweh, Yahweh, and Yah. Since this last element is taken as a hypochoristic suffix, I don't know what that even means, hypochoristic suffix, it has long been quite certain that the nature of the word is verbal, and it is thus safeguarded from dangerous onomastic comparisons. From Noth to William Albright, W.F. Albright, and to the latter's docile pupil, H.B. Huffman.
I knew him, by the way, Huffman.
Did you?
Yeah, he taught at Drew, where I studied and taught.
Interesting. Okay. He says, it has been the merit of A. Finnett, first in a study dedicated to King Yahweh Ella, and then in a specific article to have demonstrated convincingly the formal identity between Yahweh, and the name of the Hebrew God. When a fragmentary text from Ugarit belonging to the mythological Baal cycle produced a verse in which the god El said, and this is where I made your thumbnail, the name of my son is Yah. So if you watch this video's thumbnail, Dr. Price is holding a thunderbolt, kind of representing the thunder god, the lightning god, the storm. And he has the ancient tablet. Of course, it's in English. The name of my son is Yah, right? And then he puts the source. Many scholars hasten to correct the text to remove the mention of Yah. When the arbitrariness of this procedure was pointed out, they found different ways to deny the evidence. One was to see Yah as the usual verbal form, interpreted in different ways. One was to suggest a phonetic variant of Yam, the Ugaritic god of the sea. Very few scholars follow Abby H. Cazeles in accepting the existence of the god Yah at Ugarit, even though he is a god who, moreover, continues to be attested in the area. This is the good part right here to me. In the area in the next millennium, as Porphyry testifies in Eusebius's Preparation Evangelica of the Gospel, when he asserts that the god Yahweh was worshipped at Berytus. So I looked this up, Bob. I'm going to stop right there because there's so much. There's Ebla text with determinative dinger, the divine dinger there, all sorts of stuff, right? Let me take one moment. This is another book worth looking at. Anyway, we won't waste any more time. Going to the... Oh, that's another cool one Neil showed me earlier. The Chaldeans call the god Dionysus or Bacchus Yao in the Phoenician tongue instead of the intelligible light. And he is often called Sabaoth, signifying that he is above the seven poles. That is the demiurgus. All right. Yeah, these are also Mari texts, just showing you where these are texts that come from the very place where the name, that theophoric name, pops up. Okay. Where are we at here, Eusebius? That's Barker. That's the book. That's Garbini. Article that shows Dionysus. Okay, here it is. Okay. Only, let me do this to make sure we can get all the areas. Only begotten. Okay. This is the first mention. Kronos also is in... Kronos, by the way, Eusebius equates Kronos with El. It says, Kronos also, in going around the world, gives the kingdom of Attica to his own daughter Athena, but on the occurrence of a pestilence and mortality, Kronos offers his only begotten son as a whole burnt offering to his father Uranus, and circumcises himself. So this is a Phoenician tale. This is coming from Phoenicia, northern Galilee, a little above that, of course, but it's in that region, right, on the coast, compelling his allies also to do the same. And not long after, another of his sons, Rhea, named Muth, having died, he deifies himself, and the Phoenicians call him Thanatos and Pluto. And after this, Kronos gives the city Byblos, right there in Tyre, it's up there on the coast, to the goddess Baltis, or Beltis, right? Who is also called Dione and Berytus. Berytus is the very name that was being used by Garbini. To Poseidon and to the Kabiri and Agrotai and Helios. I'm not sure if I'm saying these all right. Who also consecrated the remains to Pontus at Berytus. Okay, next account. This is the one. This is the one right here, Bob. It was a custom of the ancients in great crisis of danger for the rulers of a city or nation, in order to avert the common ruin, to give up the most beloved of their children for sacrifice as a ransom to the avenging daemons. and those who were thus given up were sacrificed with mystic rites. Kronos, then, whom the Phoenicians call Elis, Kronos, whom the Phoenicians call Elis, who was king of the country and subsequently after his decease was deified as the star Saturn, had by a nymph of the country named Anabret an only begotten son, whom they on this account call Yahweh or ʿAjrūd, in the way we would say it in English, ʔajdūd, but in the Greek, and I asked a Greek expert friend of mine who's like all over Greek, Yahweh, the only begotten being still so called, Porphyry is being quoted here by Eusebius, is being still so called amongst the Phoenicians to his day in the Common Era. And when the very great dangers from war had beset the country, he arrayed his son in royal apparel. Here we are with that kingly, sacrificial, ancient Babylonian, Mesopotamian stuff, and prepared an altar and sacrificed him. So an only begotten son is dressed in apparel and gets sacrificed. He's also called Yahweh, the same Yahwistic theophoric name. And that's what Garbini is saying right here when he says the God Yah at Ugarit, even though he is a God who moreover continues to be attested in the area even in the next millennium, as Porphyry testifies. So Porphyry in the Common Era is literally using the same names that he's actually talking about that come from Canaan, solidifying the point. That region of Canaan right there, Tyre, right there on the coast, is literally, Ugarit is literally where Yao or Yeo or ʔAjrūd, however you want to pronounce it, is already rooted. So the idea that Moses brought Yahweh from the south up is falsified in a sense if you grant that what he's saying is he's already up here in the north. Maybe a Yahweh did come from the south, because we did have a Yahweh in Egypt. I mean, there might be various Yahwehs, clearly, but the idea that he's unique, he originated from the south, we should get over that and move on.
I believe Garbini says somewhere else in the book that it looks like Yahweh may have been like El, a generic word for God, in which case you think of a passage, I think in Hosea, I could be wrong, where Yahweh says that I'm worshipped in many lands or something to that effect. What does that mean?
Yeah, on the coastlines, on the islands. What? He's from Seir. Like there's so much. Thou doth protest way too much, giving away these clues. And a lot of theologians who saw that didn't want it to be that he's actually in those areas being worshipped. They'll say, no, it's foreshadowing. Like one day he's going to be on the coastline being praised by these peoples. This universal kind of a eschatological vision of one day they're going to come in. That's apologetics too. The idea that it's exclusively here. And Misam Amzalog, I'll send you this stuff afterward, documents this and says, no, the author is confessing you got Yahwehs all over the place. Now the author is not saying there are many Yahwehs. They still want to say it's one, but they're granting that even they're calling out my name. They're calling out this God, which would make perfect sense by the time you get to Hellenism and Interpretatio Graecae, interpreting with that Greek lens of Hellenizing and combining in syncretism. No wonder the hand fit perfectly in the glove, because it's already looking, walking, talking, acting in the same vein as Dionysian worship. And of course, Dionysus and Osiris, the same stuff. So yeah, powerful stuff, Bob. Powerful stuff. So super chats, let's jump on these. And sorry, I wanted to give a pretty fun, thorough takedown there to let everybody see. Okay. We already got Solera. Thank you so much for that first one. Or did we not? No, we didn't. I think, was El and Baal assimilated into Yahweh Zoroastrian, combining Ahura Mazda, light and wisdom, Angra Manu, darkness and chaos?
You mean El and Baal? I'm not sure I understand the grammar and the logic of this.
I don't either. Not fully. I imagine there was assimilation or some type of syncretism, as you pointed out with Elephantine, where he's in the pantheon along with Yah, but or Yahu. I'm not sure how they pronounce it properly down there, but not sure, Bob.
Yeah, I do think there is evidence that the Canaanites, or whoever they were, who were Baal worshippers, eventually did the same combination of gods, because just as Yahweh is combined with El Elyon, God Most High, we start hearing of Elyon Baal, which should mean the Most High Lord. So it might not mean the god Baal, but why would Baal be the Most High if he was still secondary to El? So there may have been the same movement there, and that would be an assimilation. But I don't think Zoroastrianism ever assimilated Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu or Ahriman together, because they are the opposites, unlike El and Baal, who are on the same team.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the super chat. Again, James, thanks for being a member of MythVision. GD, could the jutting headland in Homer's hymn to Dionysus be a reference to the Mount Carmel headland at Haifa? Mount Carmel appears to be from Karim El, or the Vineyard of El. Check the map for reference. Okay, let me look this up. Mount Carmel headland. Let me do this. I'd have to pull up the actual source too. So let me share my screen real quick here. Make sure I'm properly doing this thing. So this is obviously a modern map here, but there's Nazareth. Okay, so let me zoom in. Nazareth is here. Scythopolis is somewhere over here, man. It's like 19 miles away. It's not that far. So Mount Carmel is up here, which is near the coast of Haifa. So I would need to actually reread the hymn to Dionysus, where he talks about the headland. It might be that's it. But again, I can't remember what source. Let me find out what source this is. That I'll ask ChatGPT. What source? ChatGPT 5. You always have to fact check this thing, because sometimes the sources are off. What source? This is a good way to reference quickly, though, and then you can go look at the primary source. Exactly. Actually, why would I even look here? It literally was in the article here with Nissan Mamzalog. He says, Homeric hymn, Phoenician, Canaanite root. Here we go. So he says, Nisa, so first Homeric hymn traces Dionysus' origin to Nisa, a mountain most high and richly grown with woods, far off in Phoenicia near the streams of Aegyptus. I'm not sure where that would be. In the seventh hymn, he appears on a jutting headland by the shore of the fruitless sea. So you could argue, I think, that because here's the Sea of Galilee, right? Here is the fruitless sea down here, the Dead Sea. The shore of the fruitless sea, I don't know if that means somewhere along this coast, because the shore, like, how are they going to get to the Dead Sea by a boat, right? There's no way to get exactly there, and they're traveling by sea through the Mediterranean. However, you know, the guy's all over this land. I mean, literally, Dionysus is burying one of his nurses, the nymphs, in the land of Scythopolis, which is over here in the north, up here kind of near Nazareth. I don't really know the answer to this question. I don't know if anyone really knows exactly, but this is something I need to journey deeper into to find out, Bob.
Yeah, I know nothing about that, I have to admit.
Maybe there's a classicist who's really dug into this at some point I can interview. Solera Knight, thank you again for the super chat. Lazarus resurrected first. Cult of Lazarus? Many dead saints emerged and appeared in Jerusalem. Might as well. Many dead saints cults? No. Matthew 27, 51 through 53. What are your comments on that, Bob?
Was there a cult? I don't
Well,
think
you get the point, right? Like, you know, we have a cult around Jesus because he rose from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
There's no cult around Lazarus rising from the dead or people in Jerusalem who supposedly resurrected momentarily with the zombie apocalypse.
I'm tempted to say, well, Jesus' resurrection was either led to or was identified with his ascension to the right hand of God. Nobody said that about the Walking Dead or Lazarus, but like legend said that Lazarus became, I think, the bishop of Cyprus or something like that. But of course, the idea of you could just say that only heightens the mystery of it. Why was Jesus singled out when these other resurrectees were not? J. Duncan M. Derritt said that the people raised from the dead during the crucifixion, that this is a slightly garbled version of a Buddhist story where many bodhisattvas who somehow lived under a mountain were exposed, and while Gautama was giving some big revelatory sermon, and they joined him in propagating the Dharma or something. And he says that at least gives you some reason for bringing them back. And these guys weren't dead, but they were essentially buried. But because sometimes you just get something that's garbled for the sake of retelling the story, even though people have forgotten what it originally meant. And with Lazarus, of course, another possibility is that we have a parable that Luke has of Lazarus who dies, and the rich man requests that Lazarus be sent back to the rich man's non-religious brethren to tell him, like Jacob Marley going to see Scrooge, saying, look, it's too late for me, but I don't want you to end up the same terrible way I did. And there's this great element of rationalism where Father Abraham says, don't kid yourself. These guys know the Torah. They already know what they ought to be doing. This is not going to change anything. Even if we did it, they'd explain it away somehow. But like they entertain the possibility of the dead Lazarus coming back, but they just wave it away. Oh no, that wouldn't do any good. Whereas in John, Lazarus actually does come back, and many believe in Jesus because of what he has done, though it helps seal Jesus's doom. It sort of crystallizes the Sanhedrin's plans that everybody's following this guy now. What are we going to do?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the super chat, Solera. I really appreciate the support. Elizabeth Long, appreciate you guys. Thank you for the 15. Really appreciate the love. We appreciate you. Really, I love that I'm able to talk about what I love to talk about, make this a thing, and you as well, Bob.
Yeah.
More adventures to come, much more. Got a few more here. Omar Yafai, forgive me if I butchered your name. Thank you for being a member, becoming a member. How's it feel to be saved? True salvation, not the BS placebo they give you, the real stuff. No, seriously, thank you for becoming a member of MythVision. I truly appreciate it. And by the way, you look young and handsome there in your photo. Nice little, you see that young, good looking gentleman right there?
Was
Bob?
that Elmo?
It's one of them.
Yeah. You know, when I first had my little daughters, and we watched Sesame Street. I had never seen Sesame Street before, and I thought, oh boy, this is going to be purgatory, having to watch this with the gals. But I was pleasantly surprised that the show was hilarious. There was a lot of really funny stuff on it, and it's hey, great.
Yeah. Thank you, Omar. Welcome to the family. Doc Pluroma, thank you for being a member. Super chat, being brilliant all the time and asking good questions. I really appreciate it. If Aye, I hope I'm saying that right, becomes ego Emi or Amy in the LXX, is this where theology turns philosophical, an ontological pun that makes Yahweh being itself rather than just a name in covenant?
I think maybe that's right, and it makes a bit more sense to entertain that in the view of the work of the late, great Russell Gmirkin, who showed how astonishingly, thoroughly Greek thought from Plato, etc., and the Stoics had already penetrated into the Pentateuch. It was just the opposite of what Philo thought, that Plato had ripped off Moses. It's just the opposite. So when there are things like Moses sees the heavenly tabernacle and is told to have his artisans build an earthly model that exactly duplicates it. Boy, that sounds like Plato's realm of forms, and that's what it is probably. And there's a lot of stuff like that. And the whole Gmirkin shows that the whole primordial history with the sons of God mating with daughters of men and giving birth to hybrids who eventually somehow corrupt the human race and leads to the flood. Well, that's all from the Timaeus and the Critias dialogues, where it's expressed in more detail, but it is a slap in the face to read his treatment of this. Son of a gun. I mean, suddenly it's no mystery where Cain got his wife, because just as Clarence Darrow said during the Scopes trial, he says, he reads from Genesis, and Cain knew his wife and begat Enoch or whatever. And he says, now, where did she come from? You think somebody pulled off another creation in the next county? Yes, that's shows that's exactly the point. Each of the sons of the demiurge, the Greek high god who created the Olympians, had the Olympians produce populations for their own nations. And each one of the Olympian gods would marry the most beautiful human and give birth to a demigod who would become the new king. And he would do the same. And gradually the divine blood would thin out through the generations. And they were no longer so virtuous and wound up fighting. It explains what the whole thing is, why the intermarriage of gods and women issued in the flood. What? Well, according to Plato, there's a whole story behind it. So if that's the case, then you got to wonder. I mean, any way you cut it with the I am that I am thing, it's like a little etymology. Who should I say sent me? And he says, I am that I am. Tell them I am has sent you. Tell them Yahweh has sent you, because to be is Hayah. And it's like trying to derive it philosophically and as well as etymologically. So I think you're right. I think that is the point. God is being itself.
Doc, thanks again. Always witty. And I think you live somewhere near me. I'm in Davenport, so probably not too far from where you're at. Thanks for being here, man, and sticking through and everything. All the great comments, questions, super chats. Love the support. And then we have Wade Rogers. Thanks, brother, for being here. Super chat, membership, the whole nine. Dr. Bob, good to see you on MythVision. Like you, I was friend with Acharya S. Met her in Olympia, Washington, and interviewed her for my former podcast.
Wow. Yeah, she was a great lady. Yeah, we got off to a rocky start with pretty severe review I did of the Christ conspiracy, but she eventually saw my point in some of that, and on her deathbed said, "Can you get Bob Price to revise the Christ conspiracy?" One of the greatest honors I can imagine getting, and we became very good friends. She was really something.
It's interesting. Recently, Neil wrote me, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I might have found one of these keys to the whole invention of Jesus stuff that we find within Philo of Alexandria." And he said, "Guess who was the one who pointed this out?" I'm like, I had no clue, right? Who? Acharya. And I was like, "Get out of here, D.M. Murdoch," right? And he said, "Yeah." He said, when you look at the source in Philo, the way that he talks about Moses, and I don't know what text it is because Philo wrote a lot. We have a lot from Philo of Alexandria. But Moses looks so much like Jesus in this text, and I can't remember what it exactly says and how, but it looks like a perfect model for how they would have constructed the whole Jesus stuff right there. So again, it's more material to look at, kind of like the material you gave me in an upcoming video whenever I can get it done, where they have the homeless mock king scenario that Philo mentions. That's wild material. Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
If she was alive, I would have definitely, without a doubt, had done several interviews and would have kept doing them. I'm sure she'd have kept growing in knowledge, learning and tweaking her ideas, you know?
Her book, Did Moses Exist?, goes through this wealth of Dionysus Moses parallels that I had no idea existed. She was some researcher.
Huh. Yeah, there's so much to dig into. There was one example in a primary source I did look at that I couldn't find. I tried to find exactly what she was saying, and maybe she was just commenting or giving her interpretation. And it was the whole Hammurabi, one of the Hammurabi stones that depicts the king coming before the god. And she says that the king came up a mountain, almost like direct Xerox copied in identical format. But when I looked at the primary source, it doesn't give all that detail of, oh, he went up the mountain to get the law from the god. But it may be implied that they went to a high place in order to receive the divine code from Hammurabi, getting it from, I think, Shamash was the god. And so I looked and I couldn't find it. That doesn't mean it isn't there, but I want the primary source. I'm not just going to read your book or anybody's book and go, well, he says it. That's it.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. So definitely worth reinvestigating and reading myself. I've never read the full Moses myth book that she wrote. Only read like a piece here and a piece there. Okay, Solera Knight, thank you for the super chat. The evolution, a pun against creationists, Derek? Well, honestly, I'm not trying to make it against. I mean, honestly, I could talk about the evolution of Dionysus, the evolution of Apollo, the evolution of Zeus, really any and every god. What we're trying to do is just bring Yahweh down to earth a little bit for people, to see him on the same playing field we view the ancient world. And not because we're axe grinding, because we sincerely see the components and the development of this God like all other, like using anthropology. It's like we're looking at the fossils of Yahweh as he evolves and different components. Oh, now he's got the storm deity aspect, or oh, it looks like he's got this, you know. That's what I titled it as. Actually, it wasn't just me, but that's my interpretation. Bob came up with the idea of Yahweh to Jesus, the evolution of Israel's God.
You could do the same thing with Superman, looking at how he changes through video representation from the TV series, more than one, and the various movies and movie serials, and in the comics. Things change. Like originally Krypton was a planet of super powered people. Everybody had Superman's powers. It was just unusual once he came to Earth and grew up. But later, of course, they said, Oh no. Everybody was normal on Krypton, but it was a huge planet with very strong gravity, like Jupiter, I guess. And when baby Kal-El shows up on Earth, well, he could fly, or he didn't even fly. He just leaped tall buildings because of like the guys on the moon jumping high in the sky. And how did he have the rest of these powers? Well, it must have been the yellow sun, and they kept revising it. And when did he get his powers? Was he also super boy, and before that super baby? Very similar to the way mythical figures, because he is a mythical figure, a genuine myth.
Absolutely. Wendy in the chat says, or all the doctors of Doctor Who.
Yeah, they're all. Are they like reincarnations of one another or something like that?
I don't even know. To be honest with you, I have no clue. Wendy might know better than me. Someone else highlighted, this is an interesting thing. So is El the same God as Yahweh? Christ called their father the devil. I kind of wanted to merge these two comments by Cypher 9 and Cosimo de Medici. Forgive me if I butchered that.
Medici.
Oh, okay. She said regeneration for the Doctor Who's.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So here's my question. Combining is El, Yahweh, and the same, but in your Margaret Barker position that you're persuaded of, that you think Jesus is Yahweh in the New Testament, with the interpretation of the Jews are of their father, the devil, how do you interpret that if Jesus is Yahweh and the Jews' God is Yahweh, which you would imagine some type of Gnostic sect would have said the Jews are not, the Jewish God, the demiurge is not the right God, as some alternative, whether it be Valentinians or Sethians or Marcion or whoever. How do you interpret that? Do you just look at John differently? Do you just look at that material and say, well, a different issue's happening here, but I think Mark's depicting him as Yahweh? How do you get around those that seem to be targeting Yahweh as the father of the Jews, as the devil?
Well, it's possible, like there are definite Gnostic and Marcionite elements in the Gospel of John. You just have the efforts side by side of what Bultmann called the ecclesiastical redactor, whom I would assume was Polycarp of Smyrna. He talks about the hour is coming, and now is when the dead in their grave, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. But then a couple of verses later, he says, the hour is coming, and he doesn't say it's here, in which the dead in their graves will hear the voice of the Son of God and come forth to judgment. Well, in other words, the literal rotting dead, the dead in the first just means spiritually dead. And if you hear the call of the good shepherd and so forth and come forth, great, you're reborn. Well, I think that's a prime example of how someone has Catholicized the original Gnostic Gospel of John, that originally it had Gnostic realized eschatology. It's not coming. Nobody's going to say, oh, there it is over there. And no, it's within you. It's just like in the Gospel of Thomas. Well, somebody didn't like that. And so they said, no, let's put back the futuristic eschatology. There's going to be a literal resurrection. And the thing with the Eucharist, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man, and the word eat is actually like feed on or chew. For my flesh is real food, my blood is real drink. This sounds like Ignatius with the Eucharist as the medicine of immortality, whereas there's a contradiction of that when Jesus says, it is the spirit which gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. It sounds like you've got scribal debates within the text, and that it was originally basically Gnostic, but has been Catholicized, and some poor scribe having both the Gnostic and the Catholic versions of it, when that was all water under the bridge, said, what do I do here? These are very different. Well, I can't leave either one of them out. I don't know which one's authentic. I can't take the risk of omitting some of the word of God. So let's just splice them together, topic by topic, no matter if the statements are compatible or not. And so I think that, yeah, and the idea that Jews, your father is the devil. Well, that just shows radical Marcionism. When Marcion believed that the creator God was righteous but merciless, and that the God of Jesus was a God of love and would not punish or judge anyone. Well, some thought the demiurge was downright evil, and that sounds like it's contributed by somebody that thought that. Notice later he calls Satan the archon of this age or this world. It could be translated either way. That implies it's his. First John says the world lieth in the grasp of the evil one. Again, that sounds like the demiurge God, and or the God of this world is blind to the minds of the unbelievers in 2 Corinthians.
Or the temptation scene with Jesus literally being offered the kingdoms of the earth by Satan.
Yep.
How does he have kingdoms to offer? Right.
It's the spoils system. That sounds like radical apocalyptic Marcionism, that the God of this age and this world is evil. I mean, look at the world. What else could it be? But Jesus says, no one knows the Father except for the Son, and anyone to whom the Son will reveal him. That sounds like he's telling about a different sort of a God altogether. And so John can say, yeah, you're unwitting stooges and dupes of the devil. I mean, they're not Satanists. They're not going to have black masses. It says you are being deceived. What you think is God is not. All Gnostics said that. You think the demiurge is God. He's not. There's a higher being to whom you will worship. And so, yeah, it's a kind of an otherwise unattested but often implied view of Gnosticism and the demiurge. Though here's an interesting wrinkle. Bultmann said that the Greek in that passage really can't mean it means
father of the devil, right?
Yeah.
Father of the devil.
And now Litwa says no, it could mean that, and I don't know who to believe. They're both geniuses, but if that's the case, there was such a mythical entity, but I'm not sure what the point of it would be in John, because he does mean to say, well, it gets even more confused because Jesus says, my Father is he whom you call your God. Now, how does that fit?
Yeah, so there's like a mishmash of something going on here. It's a mess. And how to make sense of it. No wonder Trinitarians could come up with anything. You know, there could be like, there was a Gnostic group that had like 30 deities in one. I think it was.
Valentina said the 365 ions in the pleroma. Obviously a calendar thing.
Yeah, of course. But still, like mixing and finding that. We got a super chat that popped in here last second. By Doc Pleromonaut again. Thanks, Doc, for the super chat. While I got you, Papyrus Amherst 63 blends Israelite hymns with Bel or Bethel names. Is Yahweh's identity a palimpsest, local cults rewritten at each imperial turn?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, that makes some sense. You figure that if these guys defeated us, that means their God was mightier than ours, or we would have won. And so you might just switch allegiance to a new God. And that so the name of one replaces the other. Or you might say, well, let's just compromise and say the two gods are the same with different names. Because in a non-conquest first encounter, apparently they said, well, your Osiris sounds a lot like our Dionysus. I bet it's an alias. He's the same guy. Makes sense too.
Yeah, there's so much. I love this stuff. Bob, I love you, man. I do sincerely appreciate your time.
Oh, it's great
Everybody,
fun.
yeah, everybody, please take the time. Let me pop this bad boy back up here. Give a shameless plug to my buddy here, Bob. You got a lot of books here on Amazon. How many books have you written so far?
I think in the area of nonfiction and religion, about 30, and in the area of fiction, horror and heroic fiction, including anthologies I've edited, there are about 30 of those as well.
Oh, wow. Wow, you've written quite a lot. I hope people go get your books. Check out the Patreon. You're also on Substack. You're writing articles. What else are you doing that people can go to support you at?
Well, I have for Patreon patrons, I do a column Zarathustra Speaks, which subtitle, which is proclaiming the death of God and the dawn of the Superman, a very Nietzschean sort of perspective often. And I'm doing audio books now.
Go on Audible. Go on Audible. That's all. Yeah.
And Carol and I are trying to figure out how to get our own YouTube channel going. I guess the Bible Geek would eventually wind up there.
You need to get me one of these days. It won't take no time. We'll get it hooked up. We'll make it right. And you'll start doing some live streams so that people can come over there and listen to you with everything you've learned. You've learned so much. And again, one of the major things about you, Bob, that I've always appreciated more than anything in the world is that you taught me how to think. You've always been friendly. You've always befriended me. Even if I disagreed, you were always friendly. And you taught me how. I mean, I already knew a little bit about how to think, but like you really helped me wrestle with ideas and to consider things, and then never told me what to think, though. And that's something that I'm going to take to the grave with you, man.
I don't know what to think. I am just trying to facilitate people coming up with their own synthesis. I mean, I don't want to make disciples. I just want to be Socratic.
Absolutely. And again, yeah, Audible. Yeah, audible.com. So showing that again, you are the Socratic one, in my opinion. You're doing the best you can. You're throwing a ton of different spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. So you got to go to Audible and search for Robert M. Price. His name is in the title of this video, and you can find the books. We did have a last final entering the Jerusalem gates before the gates closed. Solera Knight, thank you for the super chat. And in that day, declares Yahweh, you will call me my husband, and no longer will you call me my Baal. Hosea 2:16.
Okay, what's Hosea? Oh, good. Bingo, that's what I'm referring to. Thanks.
Absolutely. People are saying they love you, Bob. Dusty, Marilise, of course, Doc Romanot, Wendy. I already know Wendy. Just, people love you, man. People love you, and I love you too.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Any final words from you before we wrap up and roll out?
Well, my life is all about this knowledge and the gaining of it and the spreading of it. And one reason I feel compelled to write is to contribute what I can as the search goes on. And so I figure I ought to get it down while I can.
You gotta get it down. And I want to get everything I can out of you before you croak, man. I'll be croaking one day too. And life is wild. Look, if someone hasn't told you they love you today, I'm saying it now. I love you. I hope that you are having a great day. I know life is not always easy. It can be very tough. And I hope if you're going through tough times right now that you get through to the other side, because we all go through valleys, and sometimes we just got to enjoy those moments on the mountaintops while they last. And again, hit the subscribe button. Be sure to check us out. Stay tuned. And never, ever forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.